Okay, the meeting has started. Okay. I gotta make you co-host. Okay, you're now co-host. And it says we're recording right now. Record. Okay, so now we're recording. So now I want to share. Share. Okay. So now we see that. Okay. On the Zoom, you can see me, right? Okay, great. All right.
Craig is waiting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at 3:58 or something like that. Um, I really gotta make sure everything is in order here. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
The slide is perfect.
I mean it's decent. Yeah, it is.
They got some sugar cubes, by the way.
It's like a balanced flavor. I don't have any sugar cubes, I'm sorry.
No. I bought some, so when we get back home, just put some in the Ziploc bag.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All from India.
Is on. Okay. All right. All right. Like a minute before All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, we have a few more people that are popping in, but we're going to start right at 4. So, welcome. This is the first lecture that I am doing on this topic, or this class in general. And so I'm really going to do my best to like center all of the important material that goes on in this particular like topic in this particular class. I'm going to go through a little bit of technical information for you, and then we'll just kind of dive deep and dive straight into things. The topic for this week, we're talking about the origin of the idea of race, the history of race, where it came from. The origins of racial diversity. There are a lot of interesting topics to cover, but first, before we jump into that, I want to get started by talking a little bit about myself. Okay. What would any of this discussion be without at least describing myself? My name is Julius Doyle. I am an LMU alumnus. Now I'm LMU faculty. When I was an undergrad here, I was a biology major and I developed a minor in African American studies, and I kind of wanted to balance the two. And eventually it led me to an intellectual curiosity to find ways to merge biological perspectives with African American studies. After graduating with a BS in biology and a minor in African American studies, I went on to the University of Washington to earn a master's degree in anthropology as well as a PhD in biocultural anthropology, where the subject emphasis was on African American anthropology. Yes, global anthropology in the sort of all encompassing humanitarian and human contexts, but specifically developing a subject matter expertise in African American anthropology and the topics of race, racism, and all of the ways that race and racism might permeate or intersect with other aspects of human identity. I then went on to SUNY Binghamton to do a postdoc in the medical anthropology program. I was only there for about a year or so before I then became a professor at St. John's University in Queens. I was on the tenure track in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. And then eventually, I didn't really like that too much. I backed out. The pandemic hit. Things got a little rocky, moved back to LA, and then through a series of coincidental circumstances, eventually became a professor at LMU again. And so that's how I ended up here. Uh, Important to know here is what we're going to be talking about, not just for this lecture, but in general for the context of like everything that I'm going to be talking about for the next, I want to say 15 weeks and beyond. I have enough material, at least on the top of my head, for about 30 weeks or so, but that's beyond the case. For the first 15 weeks or so, we're going to be talking mainly about race in contemporary society. This class is adapted from the uh, the clips that you see, the reels that you've seen. You've probably followed me on Instagram, and so many people have been saying, "I want to take this course. Oh my God, I got to get in this class. I got to be in there," and blah blah blah. Well, that's what I'm adapting here, and so this is not a like a one-to-one copy and paste of everything that course has to offer, but it is adapted for social media access, for public access. So in this regard, you are getting a kind of abridged version, still about 15 weeks of material or so, give or take. And so the major themes we're going to be talking about throughout the continuity of the class is the anthropology of race. We're going to be talking about African American history as well as just American history in general. A lot of the history that is well documented, well substantiated, but is often not discussed in, let's say, public classrooms because of the sort of political attempts to whitewash American history and to politicize American history in ways that render certain perspectives and avenues invisible. We're also going to be talking about race politics in the US. There's a few ways that I kind of bridge connection to global perspectives, but in general, we're just talking about race politics in the US and the social values in the American context. And so that's where majority of the class is focused. You can then see how a lot of the material that I discuss in this class coincidentally would counter or respond to a lot of the misinformation that Charlie Kirk tends to post. Okay. In this class, I like to do a thing where we're doing snowball learning here. So I don't want you to treat everything that I talk about as if you're learning about it in isolation. I want you to be able to learn the things that we learn within a given week and how they connect to something new that we're learning in the following week. And a lot of those things will help you to develop a more comprehensive, holistic understanding of the entirety of race and racism in the context of the United States. Okay. Now, for the lecture portion of the class, right? I'm doing a live recording here. I've got a video recording. But if you've noticed, if you're in the Zoom chat right now, what you can clearly see is that you cannot talk, you can't speak, you can't turn on your video or anything like that during the Q&A portion of this whole jaunt. That's when we will unlock your ability to turn on your camera. You can unmute yourself and then you can ask questions. I would like for that to be done in an orderly fashion. And right now I'm running a demo live stream on Instagram so that people can see what this kind of lecture is like. They can get a sample of it if it's something they're kind of browsing for. But they'll be able to hear you too. So just be mindful of that, okay? Yes, you're on camera. I am not going to be censoring your faces and names. You have the ability to rename yourself in the Zoom chat. So if you want to protect your privacy, if you want an alias or something like that, now would be the time to do that. And then I'm going to be uploading these recordings of the lectures, including what you can see in the lecture slides here, to Patreon, so that those people who may not necessarily want to participate in the live recording, but may want to watch the recording at some later time, they can have access to it if they so choose. Now, if you're a paid member on the Patreon, you will have access to this. So if you happen to like miss the recording or something like that, you can have access to it. But maybe there are some people who don't want to pay for a subscription. They just kind of want to pay on a monthly basis, or not a monthly basis, excuse me, like just I want to see this episode or I want to see this entry or something like that. Then you can purchase the video at a deducted price. Okay. Now, there's a lot that I'm talking about, and I would highly encourage you to wait, hold your questions until the Q&A portion. That's when we can talk, we can have an engagement, because I really want to squeeze everything that I can into an hour. It's entirely possible for the context of this particular lecture, I might go a little bit over an hour just because this is my first time doing this, and I really have to tinker with how many slides do I really need in order to account for the time. But in general, if you really have like an important question, like it's absolutely pressing, it cannot be answered at any other time than right now, you're welcome to type it into the chat. I have a moderator that will then forward me those messages. But if you can, just take a note or something like that. And then you have access to a record of the slides. So if there's something that you want to go back to or review, you have access to these slides and you can see them for yourselves. I would like to encourage you again, please do not troll the mic. If you are intentionally disruptive, if you are intentionally trying to sabotage this, if you're trying to debate me or something like that, that's not what I want this space to be. I want this space to be intentionally educational. I want it to be constructive. I don't expect everyone to be perfect. Yes, there may be areas of ignorance where people display their ignorance. That's perfectly fine. But I am not looking to create an environment of political contention. I'm not looking to debate anyone. I don't believe in fighting in rhetorical combat, but I encourage you to be curious, okay? And on that front, then it's okay to ask a question, but please do not troll the mic. Please respect everyone's sensitivities Okay. Treat this as a kind of Socratic discussion, if you will. Everyone is here to learn. I don't like to position myself as a person who thinks they know everything. I don't. And there may be areas of ignorance that you see in me, and I would encourage you to politely point those things out. It's okay. Everybody has some area of ignorance that's going to show up at some point in time, but it's important to be respectful. And then, more importantly, in the Q&A, I've added like extra literature. Like if you're curious to explore this topic, there's extra literature that you can read about, things like that. I do not like to treat the literature as if it is the inerrant word of science or something like that. I encourage you to critique the literature, find the limitations, find the faults. Let's talk about those things. I don't think that any written word is absolutely perfect. So if you have things that you're skeptical about, that you don't quite buy, that you just kind of need to understand a little bit better, treat it with the skepticism that it deserves. Okay. And then in the context of this class, because I am using it in an educational context, you've probably seen on my reels too, I do say nigger. I say nigger, I say nigga. I don't use it in a derogatory way. I use it in the context of the time period and the context in which that word is appropriately being used. For the context of this class, yes, even during the Q&A portion where you're asking questions, I would like to politely ask you to respect that only I, the educator, is allowed to use this word. If you need to refer to this word at all, which I highly doubt, then I would encourage you to use the N word as your phrase. Okay. Now let's dive in. Um, so first of all, they're just basic, okay? Anthropology is the study of human beings, okay? Human beings as biological organisms, as linguistic beings, as cultural beings. And so to some extent, you do in fact need to understand where the context of humanity fits biologically, okay? This is not to challenge your faith. This is not to invalidate any perspective that you might have. I would encourage you just to at least listen to the logic and the reasoning, right? The first thing we need to understand, anthropologically speaking, is that humans are in fact primates, okay? Biologically speaking, we are still distinct from primates in our own regard. We still have unique characteristics and traits about us, particularly when it comes to cultural adaptation. However, in the biological context, as biological organisms, human beings are in fact primates. Now, this has nothing to do with skin color. Okay. If you're looking at the primate hands that you can see on the slides right here, you see a range of skin color variation. Yes, there's highly melanated, darker colored skin of the gorilla that you see here, but then there's also the hand and the wrist of this chimpanzee, the macaque on the right. And what you can see is that these two individuals in the middle and on the right have skin color that reflects that of what we would call a white person, right? It turns out that skin color variation that we observe across non-human primates really is just a primate-related thing. That you will see absolutely dark black colored skin all the way through to lighter colored skin, and even some unique variations that don't belong to human beings. The colors red, the color blue, the color purple, for example. But there are lots of skin color variation that belong to the primate order, and they all center around shades of brown. Okay. Excuse me. Now, in the context of understanding humans as biological organisms, humans are a kind of ape. They are not monkeys. The difference between monkeys and apes is that apes are large-bodied, or tend to be large-bodied anyway, and they do not have tails. They still have other characteristics about themselves that are shared among humans: forward-facing eyes, opposable thumbs, the ability to overextend our arms, these kinds of things. But monkeys are usually medium to smaller bodied, and they have tails. Okay. Sometimes those tails are prehensile, prehensile meaning that they use their tails almost like a fifth appendage. And usually, if they have prehensile tails on the underside, they have like fingerprints that are used to help to grip. However, I would encourage you to, if you really don't believe me, you're just like, oh, Julius, you're so stupid and this is dumb and evolution is retarded and blah, blah, blah. Look at your hand. Look at the morphology of your hand and then compare it to what you see on the screen. Look at your fingernails, play around, and just compare, and you can see that there is similarity there. Well, how does that biologically develop, right? It turns out that in the biological context, in the evolutionary context, we're talking about being related to these organisms. Okay. So now shifting over, we're talking then about Africa being the birthplace of humanity. Now, primates originate from the continent of Africa, from which species of humans also then emerge. And we're not just talking about the emergence of Homo sapiens, we're literally talking about the emergence of other species of humans that existed long before the emergence of Homo sapiens. Okay. One of the earliest species, this is kind of somewhat, at least to my knowledge, still debated in anthropological communities because of how you hone in on the details of what distinguishes one species from another. But in general, the earliest or the first human species to have understood to have emerged from Africa is Homo habilis. Okay, and we know this not because of conjecture, not because we have wishful thinking about this, but that there is a detailed and extensive fossil record, and there are fossils that continue to be found today all over the continent of Africa as well as beyond. And it's usually in this green region that you're seeing on the screen here, more like the eastern side of Africa, that various bones that reflect somewhat ancestral hominid morphology is where you see the emergence of these species of human beings. Okay. And so Homo habilis only stands at about, or based on skeletal recreations anyway, we understand that Homo habilis was maybe about 3 feet tall or so. And they display lots of morphological traits: a bowl-shaped pelvis, a slightly angled femur, for example. They're usually found in close proximity to stone tools. These are the kinds of stone tools. These are called Oldowan stone tools that are used to butcher. Essentially, they're flaking off sharp edges from a specific kind of mineral or rock, and then they use it to cut meat. And you'll often see indentations that are made from these tools in other kinds of animal bones, for example. So this is how anthropologists are understanding. This is where we get the notion that like the birthplace of humanity is in Africa. This is where that comes from, right? And so it's an archaeological record, it's an anthropological record, and as we expand outward beyond just Eastern Africa, we start going into South Africa, West Africa, parts of the Mediterranean, parts of Europe, as well as Southern Asia. You start finding different species of humans too. And how do we know that these different species of humans are come before or after or during or something like that? Well, there's various archaeological methods, carbon dating, these kinds of things. And so we generalize or organize or categorize these various species of humans into what we call a genus. And a genus is basically what we would call Homo. The genus is Homo, which in Latin means man, right? And so we have different species of human. You have Homo habilis, you have Homo ergaster, you have Homo rudolfensis, for example. There's Homo neanderthalensis. There's lots of different species. Homo erectus, for example. And so these are different species of humans whose fossil remains have been coincidentally perfectly preserved across different climate conditions, across different environmental conditions, and they all display very similar morphology to what we would call anatomically modern humans today, except you can see lots of ancestral traits. Heavy brow ridge, for example, a wider rib cage, perhaps like a stalkier body shape, for example. A lot of these extinct species of humans do not display something that anatomically modern humans display. What you see on the right here is a skull of an anatomically modern Homo sapien, right? Where other ancestral species, like the one on the left that you see is a Homo ergaster. This is what's called the Nariokotomi boy, or is it the Turkana boy? No, I think it's the. Either way, this is Homo ergaster. That's the point. And so they display ancestral traits. Anatomically modern humans have a unique feature called a chin. We call this in science, we call it a mandibular protuberance. Essentially, if you took your index finger and you just kind of tucked it under your teeth and kind of rubbed it around in like a circle or something like that, you'll feel a nice little hug, right? That's where you find your chin. These other ancestral species of human do not have that. Their chin is usually rounded off. So there's the sign. This is one of the morphological signs that anthropologists look for in distinguishing modern humans from ancestral species of humans, right? And so other than that, really, there are no major distinctions between various species of humans. I should have included this image before, but there are some humans that live today and still retain many of these ancestral cranial morphological features. If you can hold on to this, make a note or something, and ask me about it later, I'll try to share an image during the Q&A portion. There is a politician, a Russian politician and a boxer. His name is Nikolai Valuev. And he has this very heavy brow ridge with a low forehead arch. He still has the mandibular protuberance, making him Homo sapiens, but he still retains many of these other ancestral morphological traits. So many of these traits that we're calling ancestral, they still exist today. And so that the one distinguishing factor is that many anatomically modern humans have this high forehead, and we don't really have so much of a robust forehead arch, and we have a chin. Okay. So now, in the context of talking about humans and the proliferation of humanity and the emergence of race, um, humans are emerging from Africa in waves. What this image synthesizes here, it is a compilation of archaeological evidence, anthropological evidence, genetic evidence. Okay. And what we know is that the first species that we are aware of to have emerged out of Africa in large numbers was Homo erectus. Homo erectus was an upright walking hominin organism that, let's say, existed about 2 million years ago or so, off at the top of my head. I'm kind of pulling that number from memory. Feel free to fact check me on that. Um, and they exist mainly around West Africa, North Africa, the Middle East, and then parts of Southern Asia. And they all display those same characteristics of what we would traditionally find in what we're calling Homo erectus. The second wave that we know of to emerge out of Africa, independent of Homo erectus, is Homo neanderthalensis. These are what you would traditionally call the cavemen, right? Now, Homo neanderthalensis is generally portrayed to be like white people, for example, but it's understood that wherever these extinct species of humans may have resided, they likely too displayed racial variation or phenotypic variation. And then in a third wave, only about 200,000 years ago or so, um, my current understanding is anatomically modern human beings descended from Homo ergaster and then emerged out of Africa in a third wave. And for about, I want to say, up until about 50,000 years ago or so, Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted. There's some genetic evidence that they may have interbred. There are lots of Europeans that not all Europeans, but lots of Europeans that have what are understood to either be inherited DNA from Neanderthals or inherited DNA from Denisovans. I could go on and on about this, but the point is that there is evidence of interbreeding between what we're calling these two species, right? There's some anthropologists that argue that Homo neanderthalensis is more like a subspecies. They're more like Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, right? And human beings, us, we're Homo sapiens sapiens. So I don't know. The debates go on and on, but where you're following this red arrow and the numbers that you see, we're looking at how many years ago is estimated that human beings inhabited those particular regions. So they emerge out of Africa, some branch off into Europe, some branch off into the Mediterranean, some branch off into South Asia. And then again, what you're seeing here are that they're crossing lots of large bodies of water. They're inhabiting other islands, so they're developing a technological sophistication that would allow them to survive sailing across dangerous climates, dangerous conditions, even ocean or marine conditions, in order to then inhabit these island regions in the Pacific, for example, for nearly 50,000 years before European colonization, right? Then you have a unique group of human beings that inhabit what is now called Russia and then cross an ice bridge into North America. And then the uppermost part of North America is where you'll find people who retain those Asian-like features. These we would call today indigenous Americans. Some are Inuit. There's many different names for them, but they are tribal-like in nature, or at least that's what their indigenous culture is. And then the groups that descend from these are then what we call those people that are native to the Americas. Okay, the Native Americans today we know them as the Spanish speakers or the Portuguese speakers because of the colonial history, but that's where they descend from is these people that inhabited these upper regions of North America. So in general, racial diversity is about adapting to different climates or climate conditions across the world. And there is no one particular phenotypic trait that belongs to any particular racial group. So in the modern context, we know Black people, for example, have dark skin, have nappy hair or kinky coily hair, big lips, big nose, those kinds of things. And yet, the image that you see here, I would describe as a near extinct. They're not quite extinct just yet, but this is a near extinct type of racial group of a human being. This is a Filipino Negrito. Um, just on the surface, and I'm going to be real with you, just being completely racist here. If I saw this person on the street or something like that, I would probably assume he's Korean, and yet he has kinky coily hair, which would then make me guess, is he like biracial or something like that? You can see how rigid notions of racially scrutinizing somebody would mislead you to think that this person has inherited traits that don't belong to him or his parents or something like that. When in actuality, feel free to Google this, there are lots of Filipino negritos that display these characteristics. They look like what you would call traditionally Asian people, and yet they have these what you call melanated skin, dark skin. They're black. They're black people. They have the kinky coily hair with the Asian phenotype, and yet they're Asian. They're not African, right? In the sense that you would call the girl on the left, who then has the Asian monolid. But we associate these kinds of eyes with Asian people, and yet there are people in South Africa who have this feature. It turns out that the Asian monolid is a feature that comes from Africa. It doesn't come from Asia, right? And then this albino European man, for example, who literally has an afro. And he, so far as I know, has no genetic or inheritance to Africa that is recent. He is native, quote unquote, to Europe, and yet displays these features, right? This Ona woman here, I think the Ona people, somebody fact check me on this because lots of people from different places and blah, blah, blah. I get my facts confused sometimes. This Ona woman here looks Asian, but is actually native to Chile, I believe. And the Ona people have been driven to extinction. So these kinds of phenotypes don't exist anymore. This Bororo man, I believe, is native to Brazil, has many of those Asian-like features, but then he has this dark brown skin. And in other contexts, you might assume, at least in the context of the culture, the country he lives in, he speaks Portuguese, but you would probably profile him as a Spanish speaker. Right. So that is to say, I'm just kind of condensing what we talk about in this class, but it is to say that there are no traits that we associate with any one racial group that like inherently belongs to that racial group. It then means that collectively we're all human, and race is not a biologically valid concept like at all. It just means that we all have difference. We all look different, and some of those traits kind of cluster together and group together, but there's no one trait that belongs to any particular kind of person. So when we talk about being black or being Asian or being white or something like that, generally, yes, we know what is meant, but biologically speaking, there's nothing to distinguish one from the other. It really is that race is a social construct. Okay. So, fast forwarding through history, now that I've told you about the biological origins of humans and racial diversity, let's talk a little bit about Africa. In general, it is my understanding that there are lots of African Americans, for example, that point to Egypt as a place of inheritance. They often use Egypt as like this, like evidence of the civility of Africa. Like there was sophistication, there was technology, there was chemistry, there were higher forms of intellectual thinking, academic thinking, and things like that. And while that is absolutely true, most African Americans don't actually have any, at least to my knowledge, connection to Egypt. They mainly come from West Africa. Now, in West Africa, that is not to say that West Africa was not as technologically or academically sophisticated or something like that. Not at all. There were lots of empires in West Africa. For the particular time period in which I will begin to describe, around the 1300s or so, West Africa was an economic powerhouse, one of the most economically powerful regions in the globe for this particular period in time. And so West Africa and the empires of West Africa, we're talking about the Empire of Mali, the Songhai Empire, the Sudanese empires, they still had trade relationships with Egypt, which meant that you had people that were commuting to and from. Yes, there may have been some cross-pollination or something like that with the people of Europe, or excuse me, Europe, of Egypt. But in general, most of the people that were stolen from West Africa actually come from, or stolen from Africa, they come from West Africa. The empires of the Sudanese empires also had ongoing relationships with Europe too, including trading slaves, including trading gold and peppers, and these kinds of things. And so they were able to develop a powerful economic standing and to wield and yield powerful armies. They were at one point a center for Islamic learning. One of the most famous regions in West Africa is Timbuktu. Maybe you don't know specifically where it is, but you might have heard of it or something like that. And Timbuktu's major empire-related trade was like gold, slaves, salt, pepper. So slavery did exist, and yes, West Africans did in fact have a hand in the slave trade. The comparison is not that, oh well, they did it first, so they're guilty or something like that. But slavery was in a slightly different context than the one in America, and I'll talk about that really shortly in just a few slides. But the point I'm generally trying to make here, I'm not going to read all of the words on the slide or anything like that, is that just because the people that came from Africa who were stolen came from West Africa, it does not mean that they were not intellectually sophisticated, technologically sophisticated. Like I said, at one point, they were a dominating powerhouse. And so that is substantiated by history. If any of you have been to West Africa, there's an extensive documented history of this, including census records and documents. This is not something that we're making up just to make ourselves feel good emotionally. Okay. If you want to think about it this way, really briefly, you can think about the empires of Mali being able to pilgrimage to Mecca, right? Because many of them were Arab, they were Muslim, and so they didn't have cars, they didn't have boats, they didn't have planes, and so the pilgrimage to Mecca, excuse me, they would need to cross the Sahara Desert. And so we're talking 60,000, sometimes 600,000 people at a time traveling across the Sahara Desert and back again and surviving. on numerous trips, on numerous journeys. So if you can think about that in the context of what we're talking about here, these people are not just savages in a bush picking their noses and waiting for the white man to come and civilize them. Not at all. However, they did in fact have a hand in slavery. Okay. And so slavery was absolutely a part of the social structure here, as it was very much a part of the old world. So when you saw that clip, I don't know, from PragerU and Christopher Columbus is talking about slavery was a relic of the old world and blah, 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 that part is factually true. It is. Um, it was that in the context of Africa, and in most cases, even the slave trade that extended to Europe as well as the Mediterranean, slavery was never really a permanent condition. And yes, white people were slave too. It wasn't just black people. There were lots of people who were slaved, including Asians. There's no empire that exists that exists in human society without slavery. That much is true. But it wasn't permanent. It wasn't dictated by skin color. It was generally a class position. And that's not to justify it. That's not to say, oh, somehow it's like less abhorrent, so it's okay now. But it was fundamentally different than designating somebody on the basis of their skin color and then isolating them and restricting their freedom and then selectively breeding them and raping them and maiming them and keeping them in that position for upwards of 400 years. It wasn't like that, right? Um, in a way, an empire could not be taken seriously without having their hand in being able to remove a person from their autonomy, from their freedom. That meant that that empire was not to be fucked with, essentially. And so, to some extent, then that displays the power that these individuals have over their particular region of the globe and the context in which they reside. Yes, there were other tribal like people that surrounded these empires in Africa. That doesn't make them any less intellectually or culturally sophisticated or something like that. But generally, these empires were using those people to enslave. Very rarely was it ever the members of their own society. I also want to remind you then, I showed you this image of the expansion, the proliferation of humanity across the globe, that while I'm talking about Africa and being an empire powerhouse, or the kingdoms of West Africa anyway, being a powerhouse, there are still people who inhabit the regions of North and South America and have inhabited it for upwards of 15 to 12,000 years before European colonization, right? And so where they resided here, again, they're very much tribal like, but they're still just as intellectually sophisticated, academically sophisticated as the people of the old world, right? These are people who are masters of astronomy, masters of mathematics, masters of making, I want to say, like predictions about the weather, predictions about patterns in nature, and then adapting to them accordingly. Much of the knowledge for what the European settlers or colonizers would ultimately get from these people about how to live in the Americas came from these people. Um, and then one more important thing, I don't have it on a slide, but again, you're welcome to fact check me, is democracy as a political concept. I don't know, I don't believe I have the knowledge to say it was invented in the Americas, but democracy was a fundamental part of how these many Native communities, not all of the Native communities, but many of these Native communities were able to interact with one another and to center peace. Yes, there was conflict. I would even go so far as to say that their ongoing conflict is what led to the emergence of democracy of these people. But by the time you get the European colonizers, they're coming from a monarchy and they're trying to figure out how they can organize themselves and distinguish themselves from being ruled by immature 12-year-olds, like 12-year-old boys, right? And so they then adapt the concept of democracy from the natives they learned it from. We wouldn't have a constitution without these people. We wouldn't have American democracy as we know it today without these people. The white people who migrated here wouldn't have even been able to survive a blizzard or a winter, a tornado, a storm, storm, a hurricane, or anything without these people. So their knowledge was absolutely fundamental to the birth of what we would eventually call the United States. Okay. Just really briefly, you can see this in the slides. I kind of want to be quick on time here. This is not all of the tribes. And again, you still have tribes in what we call Canada today, as well as all of the regions of South America. But this is what the regions that they inhabited. So don't believe anyone who says, it was a barren land and they were savages and they were cannibals and blah, blah, blah. Uh, that is not, that's not true. Okay. Now, what were the motives for European expansion? Like, why? What would even bother them to come to the Americas? Well, in general, I characterize this as what are called the three G's. You have glory, God, and gold, and these are just really, in general, the what motivates human competition on a global scale. So it's not really unique to Europe, more than Europe is just playing. They're players in the game. Glory in this regard refers to the attempt for your kingdom to become a world power. And so, in doing so, you are competing against other kingdoms, against other empires for wealth, for control of the land, for resources. Gold, in this case, is talking about the economic pursuit, the economic motive. If you can find a niche where you can get a unilateral access to a particular good of some kind, and then you can control access to that good, you can control distribution of that good, then yeah, that's going to motivate you to want to find new lands that you don't have to compete against others for. And then God, there is a religious competition. In the context of Europe, many European nations or kingdoms during this particular period were religious. They represented some form of Christianity, whereas in Africa and the Mediterranean, parts of the Mediterranean anyway, or what we now call the Middle East, they were largely Muslim. And so there was an ongoing religious conflict that also influenced the economic conflict, that would also influence the political conflict. And all three of these things kind of interplay together to motivate Europeans to go, hey, yeah, we're isolated in this particular region, but hey, if we can get access to a unique kind of land or something like that, or if we can take their land, and their land, I'm talking about maybe it's African land, maybe it's Arab land, maybe it's the land of your neighbors or something like that, engaging in this ongoing conflict, then you can control their resources, you can absorb their resources for themselves. So they're already in this mentality of take shit by storm and control it for yourself. Okay. Now, during the period that we call the Renaissance era, this is an age in which culturally Europe is trying to amalgamate Islamic philosophy, Greek philosophy, the economic methods of the Mediterranean. They have forms of currency, for example. I know that certain parts of Europe where they didn't have access to African slaves, they had a system of organization called serfdom, for example, which meant it's basically a task position where other white people are like functionally slaves in a way. Um, and so at this time, they're trying to figure out how to intellectually enlighten themselves. And through that intellectual enlightenment, can they develop more efficient trade routes? Can they manage to develop a monopoly on a particular good or something like that? Can they combine the world's knowledge into one central hub where they can borrow from different perspectives that are useful to borrow from to cultivate a more advanced or enlightened culture? And this is like the motive of Europe during this time. So around this time where they're exploring ancient Greek and Roman and Islamic philosophy, mathematics, art, arithmetic, these kinds of things, they are also philosophically pondering about the nature of what it means to be human. What does it mean to be human in the context of us as people on earth? What is our purpose? How did God ordain us to be this way? Why are we here? Why are we like this? So you can see then that in addition to the political conflict, the philosophical conflict, and those kinds of things, in general, there is a desire to expand, let's say strategically expand, but then also at play is a sort of intellectual pursuit of becoming a higher power themselves. Okay. So what you see in this map here are different trade routes. These are trade routes that the Europeans would often use to get access to different goods. We're talking about, leaving from Portugal, for example, maybe sailing around West Africa, trying to get gold, trying to get slaves, maybe going into India to try to get cotton, to get spices, to get stones and sugar, maybe going, excuse me, to East Asia or China to try to get East Asian medicines, to get perfumes or porcelain or silks. This was the way that trade happened in a global context, and it was mainly driven by boat because land kind of took too long, right? If you're traveling on land, you have to take animals with you, you have to bring food, you have to have resources. Maybe you get robbed. Then what do you do? But if you're sailing on the ocean and you're selective about the route you take, it's more efficient travel, it's faster travel, relatively speaking, because you're still sailing around continents. But it's efficient travel that would at least allow you to bring your resources back without anybody, trying to take them from you. So ultimately, then, this was the map of the world that you see on the left here, or most of the map of the world. And by this particular period in time, during the Renaissance period, the Europeans, Africans, the people of the Mediterranean, everybody knew that the earth was round. That wasn't a secret. But during this particular period in time, Christians and Muslims were in ongoing conflict, what we call the Crusades. This was a deeply religious conflict between Muslims and Christians that still has some lingering context today. Anyway, and so many of the Europeans that wanted access to the various goods that are on the other side of Asia didn't necessarily want to sail to Africa out of fear that because of this ongoing religious conflict that they didn't want to be a part of, they might get their ship pillaged or something like that. So the motive here is, well, we know the earth is round, so maybe if you sail westward, you'll come back around on the eastern side and you can skip the Arabs, skip Africa altogether. We don't have to have our stuff pillaged. And in doing so, we can keep all of our goods and we'll just hit China that way. Well, they sailed westward and ended up hitting the first of all, it was what the first region they were to hit was the West Indies, or what's called the West Indies today. But eventually that would evolve to expand to the Americas, and that's kind of what this image kind of suggests here. The Portuguese, believe it or not, were the first to quote unquote discover the lands, and then in so doing, share the news with their Christian counterparts. It could have been the Dutch, it could have been the Swedes, it could have been the French or the English or something like that, or the Spanish. But they shared news of this new land with their Christian counterparts, and intentionally left this information away from the Arabs, away from the Muslims, so that they didn't have to compete with them, right? So they go back and they go, hey, we found this new land here, and it's like there's these people, and like we were just trying to get to India, but like I don't know, these Indians aren't the Indians that we knew from like years ago, but like they're nice people. They have all of these interesting resources. You should come over and you should see what we're doing here, or what they're doing here, in essence. And so that inspired waves of migration from Europe to go and explore these lands. And initially, Europe didn't just show up and then they're like, oh, we're going to fuck shit up. Like, that's not what happened. Okay. What happened initially was they were just trying to figure out who these people were. Why are these people important? Where did they come from? How long have they been here? Why do they speak this language? Why are they all naked? Are they familiar with Christ? There's a cultural exchange that happens for maybe 5 to 10 years or so, where they're exchanging knowledge and language and developing the ability to intercommunicate. And then in so doing, it starts inspiring somewhat religious, but also philosophical explorations of like what it means to be human, because hey, there's like these new humans we've never seen before, uh, and how do they fit in our understanding of the world and of nature? And so the Portuguese conquest is what kind of led to this. Okay, this is where we get to the age of discovery, where now you have these ongoing debates about what it means to be human. And around the 1530s or so, you have Pope Paul IV, who is the ambassador of Catholicism, and he has, or what is believed to have, a direct connection to God. And he's basically advocating this notion of monogenism on behalf of these native people. Monogenism here means that all people come from one common ancestor, and according to Pope Paul IV, that common ancestor was God. Right. However, there were other people that didn't buy into this notion that God shared any common ancestry with any of these indigenous people, because my God is beautiful. And if we are all reflections of God, then God can't possibly look as ugly as that. My God certainly is not that ugly. And so, on this notion, it's a kind of emotional notion, like on its own. It doesn't really have a logical basis. Um, this inspires a kind of counter narrative to what the Pope is saying in regards to monogenism. And so others began to start advocating for what's called polygenism, this notion that, no, yeah, they might be human, but my God doesn't look like that. So humans have to have like multiple racial origins. And in those multiple racial origins, maybe Europeans are more godlike, but like these creatures, whatever you want to call them, that are quasi man, God doesn't look like that. And so you can see how it sows the seeds for like early forms of racism. It sows the seeds for like race politics. But then in the philosophical exploration of these narratives, we're also talking about racism science in a way, what would ultimately become anthropology or the early seeds of anthropology, right? So, and not just the 17th century. I want to go back to like the 1500s, but around then, this is where you start to get early anthropological thought. And a lot of that anthropological thought was very Eurocentric, it was ethnocentric, and it was racist. They didn't know any better. They didn't have any other knowledge to be able to substantiate their claims other than their own subjective exploration of racial diversity, right? And so, because what is familiar to them is European culture, European context, they just kind of implicitly center Europe as the sort of apex of civility, of achievement. And they begin to develop a science from there that sees Europe as like being more civilized, as being stronger. And they're confusing this notion of like evolution with this notion of like evolutionary progress. That if these people like are naked and they have like these weird savage like ways and voodoo tricks about them and witchcraft and these kinds of things, they must be a lesser evolved species of man, right? And so this is what motivated a lot of the exploration around race moving forward. Okay, so all of these notions, the scientific notion of European superiority, the philosophical notion of European superiority, played a significant role in what would ultimately motivate the Portuguese to attempt to conquer these native people. And in doing so, it's not just that they want to conquer the people, more than it's that there is a sort of strategic, economic, geological advantage if they can take the land from these natives. Now, the reason why these people are naked is because, in the context of living in the Americas, that is the most adaptive cultural adaptation that confers survival. The Europeans, however, see their nakedness, their cultural ways as savagery, and so therefore they see them as animals. And so it motivates them to say, okay, look, maybe we can try to enslave the natives, because then we don't need to get slaves from Africa. We don't have to navigate this Muslim conflict or anything like that. Maybe we can enslave the natives because they don't even really have slavery here. So, like, maybe we can introduce this new concept to them. They're really nice, and we can just kind of take advantage of them that way. But unfortunately, even though they tried to enslave the natives, a lot of the natives are dying from European diseases because they didn't have at least extensive contact with the Europeans. But then more importantly, the Portuguese are just straight up slaughtering them. They're killing them, they're displacing them, kind of like the conflict that you see going on in Israel versus Palestine. There's a desire to take the land, and because your interest is in the land, you can then justify the mass slaughter of other human beings who inhabit that land, right? And so many of the natives found it easy to escape, the enslavement, attempted enslavement, and many of them tried to fight back. Ultimately, they were not as technologically sophisticated. The long 1,000-year context of war that predates the colonial era did not exist in the Native Americas. So they did not have the technological sophistication to develop bronze armor, or silver armor, or swords, or gunpowder, or these kinds of things. They just didn't have that. Again, that doesn't make them intellectually less developed. It just means that in the cultural context in which they exist, they were not prepared for combat with people who had been engaging in combat with different groups of people for thousands of years. But they're not ideal candidates for enslavement because, like I said, they have an easy time getting away from the natives. Maybe they don't necessarily completely fight them off, but they can get away. They're dying from European diseases. Many of them are getting slaughtered. It's just the natives are not ideal candidates for enslavement. So ultimately, the Europeans, first the Portuguese, had to concede and say, all right, look, maybe we'll go back to Africa because Africa already had a slave trade. We're just going to show up, we'll have our hands up, and we'll say, hey, we don't want to fight you or anything. We just want as many bodies as we can possibly get. Don't worry about what it's for, but we'll give you gunpowder, we'll give you rum, we'll give you anything you want. Just get as many slaves as you can possibly get a hold of. Coincidentally, during this time, the leaders of the empires of West Africa had fallen, had died, and they left behind a cavity that did not get filled. So many of the people of West Africa were kind of vulnerable to their own system of enslavement, right? And so in making them, in essentially them being vulnerable to their own system of enslavement, it meant that the Portuguese already had contact with slave catchers. The slave catchers appointed other people to help them catch as many slaves as possible and said, hey, we're going to get a bunch of resources, we can be wealthy, let's just grab as many people as we can for these Europeans. And so that's what they did. Okay. Now, in the context of the Spanish came in and they pretty much already knew, like, it's time to fuck shit up. We're not here to play. Maybe we can convert their souls, but in converting their souls, we're not playing around. We're taking the land, and that's all we're going to do. And they're literally just killing them. So that's how the Spanish showed up, and it was absolute slaughter. There was very little engagement with the Spanish that was peaceful. And so this sets the context for the only way to survive contact with the Spanish is if the natives convert to Christianity. It was literally a convert or die circumstance. Part of the reason why let's say researchers, not just myself, are kind of led to this conclusion is because of the context in which Catholicism spreads throughout the Americas. As you know, today many Spanish speakers from multiple different countries, many of them are devoutly Catholic. And I gotta be quick. I want to invite you to look up Our Lady of Guadalupe and look up the origins of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Essentially, it was a Chichimec peasant. This is a Native American peasant who, prior to the Spanish conquest, had no knowledge of Catholicism, but is now claiming to have had a vision of the Virgin Mary. Right? To try to prove to the Spanish that he is now a believer in Christ, in Catholicism, and so there's no reason to slaughter him or the people around him. In essence, these native people were coerced into converting to Catholicism under pressure or the threat of death. And so that's essentially what you're seeing in the spread of Catholicism. And this is partly why many of those Spanish speakers are still devoutly Catholic today. It's not like they're saying, "Oh, well, if I'm not Catholic, then the Spanish are going to come and kill me." But that the religious fervor that I'm describing here, the inertia comes from the threat of genocide and impending genocide that the Spanish imposed on them. I want to be efficient. You already have the slides here, so I want to touch on the major themes and components. I'm going to take about 15 minutes or so, and then from here, I kind of have a context for how I need to form my lectures moving forward. So I'm sorry if I go a little bit over, and then we'll open up for the Q&A. I'm going to skip this slide. Essentially, back in Europe, they are exploring the nature of humanity. And you have Carolus Linnaeus, who is trying to classify all biological organisms by appearance. And so, because he's organizing biological organisms by appearance, this then means that when he gets to humanity, he is categorizing these different racial groups as if they are different species. And then in characterizing them as different species, suggesting that each of these different racial groups must have like biologically unique characteristics about them in the same way that a sunflower has unique biological characteristics when compared to a pea pod. They're both plants, but they both look different and they function in different ways. They survive in nature in different ways, right? So he classifies these different racial groups as Homo americanus, Homo europaeus, Homo asiaticus, Homo africanus, and then he's writing about these different groups. He claims that there are four distinct species of humans, and that you can use culture, clothing, how they behave in their natural state as identifiers for being members of those different species. And so he's alluding to this notion that it must somehow be in the African's biological nature to be more animal-like. And because Europeans are like more sophisticated intellectually, even though Europeans are borrowing from the knowledge of Arabs and the Mediterranean, etc., they're just inherently positioning themselves as being superior, that it must somehow be in the Europeans' nature to be more sophisticated. And so, because Europeans are inherently more sophisticated, it's like biologically ordained. And so, the scientific mischaracterization of people on the basis of their race here then sets a downstream precedent that literally we are still suffering from today. And Charlie Kirk and all of his colleagues, whether black, white, or anywhere in between, they're all a symptom of it. From Carolus Linnaeus, you get Christoph Meiners around 1770, who's borrowing from the ideas that Linnaeus laid forth. And he's a strong advocate for polygenism against the Pope. Or the notions of the Pope of that particular time. Polygenism kind of cemented itself for about 150 years or so. And he was a professor at the University of Göttingen in Germany. This is a university that still exists today. And the Nazis love him. Okay. He is claiming to have studied the physical, mental, and moral characteristics of each race. And on that basis, he's then saying, there's no need to come up with four different racial groups. Yeah, I mean, yes, we know that there are distinct four different racial groups, but really you can just kind of designate them as two. You have the beautiful white race and you have the ugly black race. And really, the ugly black race is characterized by shared traits of inferiority. They're immoral, they're more animal-like. And the white race, by comparison, is more elegant and soft and delicate. And really, that's all you need to distinguish the two. So it doesn't matter if they're American. It doesn't matter if they're African. It doesn't matter if they're Asian or something like that. Really, you can just kind of designate the two that way. And so Christoph Meiners kind of takes off in this regard, and he becomes a highly favored, highly cited scientific peer for quite some time. These are his writings here. This is a quote from his writings here. You have access to the slides, so I'm not going to read it. But essentially, this quote here is justifying that Africans or these savage-like black people can tolerate more pain. They're more animal-like. They're somehow biologically predisposed to like murder and cannibalism and to eat off of like the most and worst indigestible foods. They have a thicker skin and so can tolerate more pain. He's essentially dehumanizing them, and so this sets a cultural precedent for how the Americas would go about treating Black people. Essentially, he's claiming the Negro felt less pain than other races, barely had any animal feeling, is kind of just has an evil disposition about them. They're the most unhealthy race on earth with a poor diet, a lack of morals. And so the cultural context of chattel slavery in the Americas, where you see people being beaten, brutalized, in many different ways, whether that was in the context of slavery or not. Nobody is necessarily saying, well, Christoph Miner said that we can do this. Like the people in this lynching photo are not saying Christoph Miners said. It's more like the writings of Christoph Miners becomes the culture norm. It becomes the norm that then sets a precedent for people to go, yeah, well, it's just kind of common knowledge. Niggers feel less pain. Niggers are more likely to kill people. They're more likely to be kind of like of an evil disposition. They're more animal-like, and so really they don't deserve to be treated with the dignity and respect that Europeans inherently deserve. And so this creates and normalizes a culture of white supremacy. Okay, so then on that basis, you have then the Native Americans. I like to refer to them as the first Americans. He's also saying many of the same things about these people too. And many of these natives are also getting lynched and brutalized and beaten and ultimately displaced by these same people. What I'm describing here is that it sets a kind of cultural precedent where he's also talking about Middle Easterners, the Arabs, as being of an evil disposition. What does that sound like? Where the Celts, for example, are selective about their diet. They've conquered several parts of the world and they're like the noblest race. You can clearly see how that would set a cultural precedent that then other scientists are building on. By 1776, you get to the writings of Johann Blumenbach, where he's saying, no, I really think there are like five distinct racial groups. You have Caucasians, you have Mongolians, you have Negroids, you have Malayans, and then you have Americans. And God created all of these things, all of these different groups, and he wants them to stay separate. He wants them to be that way because if they weren't separate, they wouldn't look different. And so, in their respective nature, God wants them to be separate. And so, this starts to build on the notions of like, yeah, maybe they are like variations of man, but maybe separate but equal is like a thing. This is where those seeds start to get planted. Anyway, fast forward to Samuel Morton by the 1830s, where he's literally gathering skulls of Europeans, Native Americans, Asians, Africans, and then he's comparing the sizes of their skulls, or what's called cranial capacity, to suggest something about their intellectual capabilities. Where he then creates an intellectual hierarchy. Coincidentally, Europeans are placed on top, and then Native Americans, Asians, and then Africans. Africans are at the bottom, right? And so then he's saying that somehow the size of the brain suggests something about their intellectual capacity as human beings. Then by the time you get to 1877, we're talking about the science of Lewis H. Morgan, where he's positing a theory of social evolution, where he says that mankind has to pass through different stages of social evolution. Everybody starts off as savages, but then they evolve to become a kind of noble savage. They're like barbaric. And then from that stage of barbarism, they then evolve into a state of civility, or what he positions to be Europe. The same language or the same kind of structure is used today. The only difference is that we call it first world, third world, these kinds of things. The language has changed, but the seeds of what Lewis H. Morgan has written and left behind still exist today. This work would then be built by scientists like Freud, by Darwin, and so it sets this precedent where now scientific racism becomes the culture norm. It becomes the culture norm that Black people are inherently inferior, they're inherently less intellectual, they're inherently animal-like, they're more likely to go out and kill and slaughter and do all these kinds of things. And for some reason, people in the modern era who repeat these same talking points, they never know where they got it from. It was really just kind of notions that they absorbed from the culture around them. I have two more slides, I believe, two-ish more slides. Um, and so this sets the precedent for what would ultimately result in the emergence of colonial laws. And these are laws that would be explicit in strictly prohibiting Black people of the Americas from being Christians, because according to the British customs of the day or of the era, Christians could not be enslaved. So if you can codify the restriction of Black people from becoming Christian, then it allows you to enslave them. Um, and then you prohibit Black people from owning firearms or having access to muskets, because then the slaves cannot engage in an overthrow of their enslavement. You prevent what's called miscegenation or interracial sexual relations from occurring, um, because God has ordained that the races should not mix, right? And so it creates these notions of laws around outlawing interracial marriage, outlawing interracial relations, and yet the slave masters are like still raping people. They're still producing biracial children with these people. It's something to think about. But that's where you get these slave codes, these early colonial laws, and they're distinct by state. It's kind of copy and paste, but they're distinct by the colonized region of the time. And that leads to what you observed today. This is the last point I want to make before I open up for the Q&A here. This is where you get to essentially fast forwarding all of this scientific racist precedent to the modern era. This is where you get European colonization, setting the precedent for how we see the racial makeup or the diverse makeup of Brazil today, right? They are people who speak Portuguese and largely are comprised of Black, brown, and white people. Yes, Brazil has one of the largest Japanese populations outside of the country of Japan, but that's for a completely different reason than the one I'm talking about. But you still have this phenomenon where the conservative politicians are still trying to displace the natives, right? Um, this sets the precedent for what we know in Central and South America today, where you see people who largely speak Spanish and are comprised of Black, brown, and white looking people, where the conservative politicians are still passing laws that try to displace the indigenous people and consolidate political power. Um, and then in the Americas, right? North America, where you have a multiplicity of languages from people who speak English, French, Spanish, for example, and are largely comprised of Black, brown, and white looking people. Again, Asian here is for a different reason. Where the conservative politicians are still passing laws to displace indigenous people and consolidate power for themselves, you can see how many of the things that we are currently observing in our modern society are deeply connected to the history of what happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And that sets a precedent for how we're going to move forward in our discussion here. I'm going to end the talk there. Um, I want to open up for questions. Let's see if we can get this started. I'm sorry, the reason why we're doing 10 minutes a little bit behind is because I had technical information. I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves and then to turn on video if they would like. And if you have a question, now is the time to join in if you would like. I want to open it up, and then I'm currently running a like a freebie session on Instagram. I'm running a freebie session on Instagram Live. This is just to demonstrate that I'm actually here. This is real. If you want to have access to the class, I invite you to have access to this class, and you can see that I'm essentially teaching the same material, and I want to open it up to Q&A. So anybody who's in the Instagram live session, if you want to ask me a question about anything we've talked about or just in general, now is the time. Still waiting, I guess. I don't know. How often do I lecture live? Yeah, this is the first time that I've done this. The goal is to do it every Sunday. At 4 is a lecture, and then at 5 is a live Q&A. And this is basically it's an abridged version of the class that I teach. If you follow me, you've seen reels. Um, and Yeah, this is just a regular thing. So if you want to have access to the lecture slides, this is probably the only time that I'm going to run a freebie session. After this, it's going to be subscriber only. But if you want to have access to this, this is what it would look like. And if you're from the Instagram, then you have access to, if you pay in the Patreon, then you have access to the slides, and then we're doing weekly meetings. Take any
I
more
have a
questions?
question. I have
Yeah.
a question. First of all, thank you for this. It was fascinating. Learned quite a bit. How do you think we can move beyond thinking of race only as a category of identity and instead recognize it as a system that shapes power, access, and opportunity in everyday life?
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
Um, honestly, ironically, because of where I left off in the talk, I think the answer is science. It is, do you have a scientifically adequate understanding of race that allows you to see the nuance in the political rhetoric that appeals to lots of people, and then to see the inherent flaws in this kind of rhetoric, the problems in this rhetoric, where that rhetoric even came from. Why is this person, Charlie Kirk, for example, because that's what my page has become about, why is this person who clearly doesn't even know his own history? I'm confident in saying he doesn't really have an adequate understanding of American history, but then more importantly, pre-American history. How is it that he's perfectly parroting many of the same things that these people from hundreds of years ago have been saying and are substantiated by nothing? There's no evidence. If we have a scientifically accurate understanding of where these things came from, how people are humanized in this regard, it then gives us the basis to cut through a lot of the bullshit. Um, will I give Instagram? First of all, does that satisfy your question, Deidre? I'm sorry.
And yes, it does. And I just want to say that I always look at it from the lens of I'm teaching in high school and we will start our ethnic studies the semester course this
Yeah,
upcoming September. And so I'm always looking at it in the sense of, how as teachers can we best go about instructing young people to get them ready for I look at it as a progression. So what can we do on our level to prepare them for the next level of greater discourse and building of a critical consciousness? So, yes,
yeah,
you did. And thank you.
awesome, great. There was a question that I saw up here. I want to get back to it, and I might have to scroll up a bit. Maybe some people were asking questions before, and I didn't see them. Will I give Instagram viewers reading material? If you are a subscriber to my Instagram page, it's literally just $1. If you're a subscriber to my Instagram page, I will upload all of the supplementary materials that are available in the Patreon. The problem is from here on out, the Instagram is only going to have access to the Q&A. If you're paying that $1, if you want access to the lecture, the slides, those kinds of things, you'll have to join the Patreon. But uh, uh, right now, I'm just kind of demonstrating a proof of concept. That's really what's going on here. Somebody asks, are there going to be recordings that can be accessed through your Patreon if unable to attend the live lectures? Yes, there are going to be recordings. I am recording this session right now. After I edit it, likely tomorrow or something like that, it will go up and be available. If you don't want to be a monthly subscriber to my Patreon, you will be able to purchase for a reduced price, purchase access to individual lectures like this one. Um, any other questions? Maybe there were questions about maybe I brushed over something and didn't quite expand or something like that. Um, I don't see how many. Yeah, even on Instagram, you're welcome to ask a question. Could I invite anyone else in the chat just so that the Instagram can hear your voice, or maybe Deidre, if you have another question, feel free to talk with me, chat with me, share your thoughts with me. What are your impressions about what we talked about so far, right? And then next week we're building on this. So, um, how long is the whole course? It's I would say this particular course, what I'm currently going through right now, I would say estimated is about 14 or 15 weeks. Um, and it's building on itself. So I don't want anyone to treat any given lecture other than this first one as if it is disconnected from something else. All of this connects together, and it builds on itself and it echoes, and it will be very clear to you how it connects to the present, that you are then seeing Black conservative people that are saying many of the same things that Charlie Kirk is saying, while I'm calling Charlie Kirk a white supremacist. It's If you join the Patreon, you're going to see how this unfolds. And in addition to that, you'll be able to scrutinize me about this. Like I said, I don't really want this to be in the context of a debate. If you have a different perspective to share, I invite you to share it. I encourage that. I love sharing different perspectives and ideas and exploring these ideas and this history in different ways. But I'm a professor. I'm an educator. I don't want to fight people. I don't want to tell them they're wrong and then spread misinformation by making up numbers and bullshit on the fly. Maybe I have certain things that might be factually incorrect or flawed or something like that, and you're welcome to fact check me. I encourage that. That's all a fundamental part of intellectual learning. I had already typed it, but it is important to remember that the Spaniards didn't plan to conquer Mesoamerica from the start. Cortez was basically disobeying orders and was on a suicide mission. I've heard a differing perspective. That's interesting. And if you were here in the Zoom chat, I would invite you to share more information. Like I said, I don't know everything. To my knowledge, my understanding is that the extent of peaceful encounters with the natives was really led by the Portuguese. And then at some point, the Portuguese understood or realized that actually there's an advantage here. These people are really nice. They're not as technologically sophisticated as we are. And maybe we can build an empire here that the Arabs can't even reach. They have no knowledge of. And then we can start growing things over here that they don't have access to. And now we don't have to go to China. We don't have to go to Europe, or excuse me, to Asia. We don't have to go to Africa anymore because we can grow those things over here and we can have unilateral access over here. And all we have to do is take the land. And so by the time you get to that line of thinking, Spain is already going convert or die. That is to my knowledge. However, I am open to being wrong. I don't want to sit here and pretend like I have the inerrant truth on this. It says, and of course, Spaniards were so violent on their in their ways because of the trauma of taking down the caliphate. This is absolutely colonized, blah. This is contextualized, forgive my misspeak, by the Crusades, by the ongoing wars that were happening in the old world that then set a precedent for the brutalization that would ultimately occur in the Americas. And so again, it's by this time you have people who, in their cultural context, whether they're the Spaniards, whether they're the Portuguese, in their own cultural context, it is normal to fight, to slaughter, to conquer, to take advantage. And so they just bring that line of thinking over here to the Americas, and the Spaniards, to my knowledge, the Spaniards simply led with it. It could have involved disobeying orders. I wasn't there. I wasn't alive. I didn't see it. But to my historical knowledge, yeah, the Spaniards really just kind of laid waste. And so they bit off more than they can chew. If you can think about the size of Spain relative to how many Spanish-speaking countries there are in the Americas, they were absolutely aggressive in trying to get as much of the land as they possibly could. And so this is part of it. Now, I'm not trying, when I say this, like convert or die, convert to Christianity or something like that, I am not saying that to try to delegitimize anyone's faith. I don't like to do that. But I don't want to shy away from this notion that, religion does not have a history that is all sunshine and rainbows. Um, it's quite ugly. It's quite brutal, and uh, that's just the ugly truth, right? There is no group of people on Earth who do not have an ugly history, regardless of how they identify or what other group of people or culture they affiliate with. Don't worry, I'm Mexican, so these things were taught to me since I was a kid. And don't worry, once the stream ends, I'll check your Patreon. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your support. Like I said, you can get a taste of what we're even going to talk about here with the reels of that you can see from my lecture. My lectures, this is basically the class, but going into more detail than at least more detail than what you would see in a 2 minute reel, a 3 minute reel, or whatever time limit Instagram likes to limit. Okay. Are there any questions? I would love to hear thoughts, impressions about what we've talked about. Maybe you just have a question in general. Uh, a thought you want to share. I'd love if I could get more voices in the Zoom. Excuse me.
Well, follow-up one. As much as I have learned from your reels that help people to understand and also debunk the misinformation that Charlie Kirk is putting out there, how do we, as your average everyday citizens, how do we best challenge racial myths and misinformation without reinforcing his platform or the platforms of others? And also without exhausting ourselves in the
Yeah,
process. How can
yeah,
we stand? How can we stay vigilant?
yeah. I think first of all, I think that is catch 22. I got to be honest with you because in engaging with a person like I will tell you, Charlie Kirk is intentionally malicious. Um, Sometimes he says things that I don't even think he believes. And it is because he gets money from politicians and political platforms to do this, to garner support for conservative politics and conservative ideas. And so I always encourage people, don't talk to Charlie Kirk. Don't talk to people like Charlie Kirk, because what he does and what he's paid to do is to just make things up on the fly to try to swoop you under your feet and then make you look stupid. And so people come in with their ego going, well, I know I can take him on and I can blah, blah, blah. He's not a person who at all will willfully concede that he is wrong. So it's very difficult to say, engage with people because there are people that are just as intentionally malicious as this person is. Um, at the same time, I do think that there are lots of people that are intellectually honest, right? And intellectual honesty, I'll tell you what that looks like. It looks like having a base of knowledge, but not being so confident in that base of knowledge that you are not open to receiving or hearing information that may contradict the foundation of your knowledge. And so if you are encountering other people in the wild on the street who who may be of a political leaning or may have certain bases of knowledge or something like that that are fundamentally flawed. You want to have a base of understanding, and that's what I'm trying to give. That's what I'm trying to share to the world of historically documented and supported history. But you don't want to be combative. You want to understand where the person is coming from. You want to be intellectually curious. Hopefully, they're also reciprocating that curiosity too. And it really does become a conversation. It doesn't become combat. You're wrong. I'm right. Shut up. You're a piece of shit. Oh, da da da. I hate you. Because if you see some of the videos that Charlie Kirk is encountering with a lot of these people, it's fanning those flames. And there's two bubbles. There's like echo chambers. The conservative bubble is hearing what they want to hear, and they think that's true. And then the left leaning bubble is hearing what they want to hear, and they believe that to be true. But there's not an exchange of ideas that is calibrated towards verifiable truth. So be careful who you engage with. Engage with people. It's okay to do so, but do know that it really is about having a conversation rooted in intellectual honesty, and it is not an ego competition. It's not a battle of wits. We're not trying to win in the context of I'm going to debate you and then you're going to admit defeat and pretend to be stupid. But it's really about, did you not know this? Because everything that I told you in this lecture, you're welcome to go look it up, to Google it. There's even .gov, government supported resources that cannot be touched by somebody like Donald Trump, because it is the history of the United States. Now, politicians can try to control and overemphasize the rhetoric that's there, but it is the history of the United States. These it is protected knowledge, protected resources. You're welcome to go and verify these things. I'm not making anything up. But the moment Charlie Kirk starts pulling out numbers out of his ass, numbers are easily verifiable. You can't verify those in the moment where he's got a camera on you and he's making up numbers and he's catching you off guard. Um, but in the way that I'm engaging with somebody like the spread of Kirk's misinformation, I'm not talking to him at all. I'm just fact checking all of the lies he spreads out there. And that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. I don't know. I don't think everybody needs to do that. Um, but I don't know. Somewhere in there, I think I answered your question. Um, Are you worried that Trump will try coming after your classes and others that teach factual history of oppression? Well, he already is. He's already trying. Um, the problem is, if you want to get rid of diversity and inclusion, then it doesn't. Yes, I'm teaching in an African American studies department. Yes, this is an African American studies base course. But then at the end of the day, you can't tell people what to teach. You can make a textbook and you can say we would like to emphasize these lessons and those kinds of things, but at the end of the day, you can't, because there is something called the First Amendment, especially in private institutions like LMU. You can't overreach into a private institution and go, you can't do blah blah blah. You can't say X, Y, and Z. You can try to attack their funding. Okay. Sure, that's one way you can try to delegitimize them. But then the Trump information, or Trump information, the Trump administration, excuse me. I've been talking for so long. The Trump administration um, is temporary. They're not going to be around forever. Okay. In this 4 year period, you're going to do damage, but can you damage everything? Can you undermine everything? No, you can't. And the one thing you're not going to do in the United States of America is overreach on constitutional rights by telling people what they can and cannot say, especially when it comes to U.S. history. I don't have an agenda of villainizing white people in the same way that Charlie Kirk likes to villainize black people. Tomorrow's Real, we're going to compile some footage of all of the anti-black rhetoric. These people have a hard on for anti-blackness. Uh, I don't do that. That's not my goal. I don't think that all white people are evil. I don't try to make my students feel guilty. I'm not doing that. The only thing that you could possibly have a problem with is the fact that I am exposing the origins of your political ideology. And you don't want people to know that, because if people know that, then it allows them to see your flaws. That's really it. Okay. You know, so yeah, I mean, sure, maybe you live close to LMU. I would say don't just show up to campus. If you don't belong here, don't do that. It don't try to jeopardize student safety. Don't try to show up to my class and think that I'm gonna let you in and audit. If you're not an admitted student, if you're not a part of the registry, I still would like to protect the privacy, the interest, the safety of my students. So please, yes, I am a professor at LMU, but please, even if you're interested, if you're like a fan or you're enthusiastic about this, the best way to get access to this information, if you would like to take this class, is to join the Patreon. This is why I created it. I really wouldn't have even done this if people weren't specifically asking for it. So this is your access. This is the way that you are going to get it. And this Instagram live stream is literally just a freebie. It's just a proof of concept. You can see that it's real, it's happening. But next week, we're going exclusive. So if you're interested in continuing to pursue this class, interested in the Q&A, maybe you want to grill me about some of these perspectives or something like that, join the Patreon. But please do not come to LMU. Don't show up on campus. Don't show up to my class. Please don't do that. Um, in the current political social climate, do you see yourself as having a role in changing the minds of those who find themselves in the far right spaces, or do you view that as a lost cause? I'm kind of on the in between. It's hard for me. In a way, I think that some people have drank the Kool-Aid so much that it's almost like brainwashing. You hear the same talking points from different faces on the conservative side, and they're all easily debunkable and verifiable. I'm just doing it one reel at a time on Instagram. Am I trying to change minds? Well, okay, I don't have a political goal of trying to recruit people into a specific political ideology. I simply think that right now, in this moment in time in America, I have access to a body of knowledge and a source of education, and I would like to think that I have an overstanding of this material to such a degree that it's important for me to share it with the American people. It's important for me to share this stuff with you. Personally, yes, I have to live, I have to survive, I have to have a career and all of that. I do not believe that any of this information, again, this is the kind of education that people in a college setting are getting, the kind of information people in a college setting are getting. Although in my class, it's more like we're talking to each other a little bit more. Um, I don't think any of this information should be hidden behind an $86,000 paywall. Yes, that's how much people are paying per year. Um, I don't believe in that. I think it's ridiculous. I think it undermines the resilience of us as a country. And ultimately, everybody here who didn't get into college, didn't go to college, including Charlie Kirk, has access to all of this information. Let's say even if Donald Trump tried to get rid of it, there are other countries that also keep stockpiles of archives of all of the history of other countries too. It's impossible to get rid of this. Okay? It's impossible to get rid of history. The best you can do is to try, in the age of information and technology, you can try to rewrite it or overemphasize certain things over others to spin a narrative, but you cannot get rid of this history. And so I just simply believe that in the era of kick them out, get them out of the country, black people are predisposed to killing more than any other racial group, and a blah blah blah, and oh, they commit all the crimes, and oh, trans people don't exist and they're men, and blah blah blah. It just so happens to be that as a biocultural anthropologist with subject matter expertise in African American studies, uh, I simply have a knowledge base that is compatible and can speak to the chaos that I'm currently watching unfold. And I have been on a journey for years now And I've experienced a lot of failures, but I've been on the journey to try to use my skills to make a positive contribution. I just want to be helpful. I want to help people. I want to help to remedy the problem of racism in the United States in the ways that it presents itself and it exists. Um, but the cultural norms of American society are still firmly rooted in white supremacy, whether we like to admit it or not. And so maybe the best way that I can make a positive contribution is to just share information with people. That's really where I'm at. How far left am I? Um, I don't really consider myself to be far left. I don't identify as conservative, and that is because I understand the history and the origins of where American political conservatism truly comes from. Am I so radically far left that I'm like stuck in like I don't know, I'm in the same sort of brainwashed cesspool that some other far left people clearly appear to be in? I don't believe so. I'm just more like I fundamentally believe in the principles and values of American freedom, democracy. I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in protecting and defending the Constitution. I believe in American freedom and holding America, truly holding America to that standard, at least in the context of where I sit at the table, looks like exactly what I'm doing. It's not, I don't have a political propaganda game other than to undermine the people who are clearly doing damage to their own country in the name of nationalism and far right politics, which are clearly teetering on fascism, which is fundamentally anti-American. So that's where I sit politically. Maybe I'm helping people to see a different perspective, yes, but I'm not trying to convince anybody. I just think that the information needs to be made available, and I don't think that it needs to be behind an $86,000 paywall. Being mindful of systemic racism within medicine and distrust in healthcare professionals, would you say that there are similar barriers in accessing and trusting mental health care and support? Absolutely. This is one of the things we're going to be talking about in the 15 or so weeks that we're going to be talking about different aspects of racism in American society. We are absolutely going to be talking about how scientific racism has manifested into healthcare practitioner or praxis. As I said early on, I don't know if you were part of the discussion before. I did my postdoc at SUNY Binghamton in upstate New York, where I was a part of the medical anthropology program, which included critical analyses of the practice of medicine in a global context, not just in the US, uh, but how Western cultural bias, particularly in the context of American cultural bias, certainly has created medical mistrust, exploitation, and the atrocious legacies therein that have helped to perpetuate the ineffective treatment of ill and disaffected people. So we're going to be devoting, not, I don't want to say one particular week because it all overlaps, but there is one particular week where we will absolutely be honing in on that. And mental health care has its implications connected to this context. Um, I'll give you some anecdotal evidence, just personal evidence, not evidence, personal experience here. Early on, actually, believe it or not, when I was an undergrad, as here at LMU, I was in a weird nexus. I was only about 18, 19, maybe, and it was very clear that I was growing into a man. And I still had my youthful ways about me, still kind of identified, acted as a teenager, was very immature, and I had these ways of being rather innocent in my own autonomous way. And I started noticing that people around me stopped treating me with the innocence that I perceived of myself. And I realized very quickly that it's because I'm black. I'm black. I'm a black man. I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm starting to look more like an adult, and other people are starting to treat me like it. And I went to therapy. I was really stressed out about it because I had black peers, black mentors, and things like that. I think there were some other personal life related circumstances going on, but I was dealing with stress. So I went to the campus therapist at the time, who was not a black person. I won't say this person's racial group out of fear of bastardizing this story, but this person was not black. And as I was articulating to her what it was that I knew I was experiencing, are you sure? Why are you paying so much attention to race? Why do you think that's significant? I don't really think that's significant. Maybe something else is going on. It became a way in which I'm looking at Trayvon Martin, I'm looking at Mike Brown, I'm looking at all these people, and I'm starting to go, holy shit, no, no, the ways that people are starting to treat me is like I'm starting to see something. And I know what I'm seeing. And I know what I'm experiencing because 2 years ago when I was 16, 4 years ago when I was 14, blah, 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 I wasn't experiencing this. People treated me with the same innocence that I saw in myself. And now suddenly I'm not getting treated that way in most spaces that I enter. And it's very disturbing to me. Why am I experiencing this? And how do I move forward? I don't even know how. Are you sure? I think you're paying too much attention to race and blah, blah, blah. Right? So, yes, mental health care and support also plays an important role in this advent of medical mistrust. And we will be talking about that. No, I will not be centering anecdotal experience, but I do think it helps you to expand your your understanding here. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to get more questions if I can. Um, Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry that you weren't actually heard in therapy. The one space you should be heard. Yeah, absolutely. But there's lots of stories like that. There's lots of stories of therapists that, sometimes they deviate from the standard practice that they're expected to engage in. And sometimes the ways that they disaffect people can appear to be racialized. Um, and so for me, it created a racialized experience. Whether or not this person intended to, it certainly left a racialized impression on me. Um, but obviously, I have healed from it. I've grown from it. I've moved on from it. Obviously, I've matured in lots of ways. Uh, but there are a lot of people that are probably experiencing the same thing and don't even know how to handle it because they put so much trust in their therapist. So. That's not me saying distrust your therapist. It's just these are the kinds of things that happen. Anyway, any more questions here? Um, like I said, for next week, we're going to continue on talking about notions of racism. We're going to be talking about the scientific theories around racism. I'm going to expand a little bit more on the history, not too much, but we're going to start to get into technical details. I just saw a clip of Amanda Seals talking with a black conservative who was saying that systemic racism doesn't exist. And so we're just going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what systemic racism even is, whether or not you agree with it. It doesn't really matter. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna explore it, and I will substantiate that for you. It's not an idea. It's not a pipe dream. It's not just a political talking point. It is deeply rooted in the context of American history and shows up in the ways that American institutions engage with the public. Um, and so, yeah. Is there any other question? I really want to like talk to people. I only have one person speak. Maybe people really just are here to learn, and that's absolutely fine. Um, okay. Uh, well, I'll hold for one more question. If somebody has one more question, and after that we'll shut it down. Um, does anyone have one more question? Maybe it's a question about systemic racism. Maybe it's a question about the film industry. Maybe it's a question about Charlie Kirk and debating Charlie Kirk. If you really want to do that, I think it's a lose-lose. In my personal opinion, I would say just never talk to this person. Never talk to people who maliciously spread misinformation. And so many people don't know how to go about verifying scientific claims that it just becomes a thing where you either believe them or you don't. Um, Hopefully, in the expansion of my social media page, I will be demonstrating to you how to go about verifying claims that are made and whether or not they're true, so that it can stop being a matter of belief. Uh, it's fairly simple, but it does require intellectual scrutiny. And if you're not willing to do that, it is very likely that you will end up identifying as conservative. This is why American conservatism, anyway, positions itself as being fundamentally anti-science. That is not necessarily an endorsement of far left politics more than it is pointing out a fundamental flaw is that science grows. Science builds on its knowledge base. It is ever changing, while culture norms have a lag effect behind scientific precedent. So when the science or the science of the era radically changes, there is a group of culturally conservative people that have found a niche, a groove in the way things are, and then become so disrupted by the scientific changes that they end up positioning themselves as being anti-science. And so, in the case of Charlie Kirk, that anti science manifests as a form of spreading untruths and encouraging people to be ignorant. That he doesn't want people to go to college. He thinks college is a scam. Now, to an extent, I kind of agree, only on the basis that I don't think that any of this knowledge should be hidden behind a multi-thousand-dollar paywall. Outside of that, does that delegitimize a collegiate education? Absolutely not. There are benefits that come from having a collegiate education, no matter what a person majors in, whether that's in the humanities or the arts or the sciences or something like that. There is an absolute benefit to be gained from going to college that is demonstrated in a person like myself, a college graduate and a academician, in comparison to somebody who couldn't even complete maybe the first or second year of community college. And if ever either of us got on the same stage, like I said, I'm only willing to debate Charlie Kirk if it is a truly intellectually honest debate. I would only be willing to debate him if it is actually a comparison of ideas and not just a shouting match. So if I ever got on a stage with this person behind a podium, you will see the difference, and it will be a thing where I would be encouraging people in real time as they are watching it to fact check me live. Fact check me, see if I'm lying. Right. I'm just grateful for this session. Please join me, join my Patreon. I invite you to join my Patreon, please, because I need the support. I need to grow this, and I really want people to have access to this information. But because it's Sunday, I have to take my personal time to go and do this. I really do need the support, but it's not much. Okay. Since I'm not American, what is Black Studies focused? Black Studies is not just a narrow focus on Black people. Rather, it is a focus on a specific kind of person who calls themselves Black in a world around everybody else who is and is not Black, right? So it is the same way that we would describe American history. American history is not just about American history, but it's about the history of America, not only in context or relation to itself, but in relation to the rest of the world. It's kind of like that. Random listener here, and I appreciate this freebie. What's the Patreon? The link is in my bio. Go to my page, click the link in my bio. You'll see the link to the Patreon. and you can join, you can have access to. And once I record this lecture session, I will be uploading the video, and you will have access to it. And you can purchase it if you are that intellectually curious to have access to the information. You can purchase that and the resources if you don't want to join the Patreon. But please join the Patreon because I need that to fuel the continuation of this. Last question. It will never be an intellectual debate, and we need to leave these people alone on their island. I hear where you're coming from, but I will tell you just on my own. Yes, this is anecdote, but this is my personal experience. As a professor, I have a lot of students that come in that are coming from conservative backgrounds, conservative homes, conservative communities. I am not brainwashing them. I'm not inserting political propaganda. I don't have ties to APAC and to the Democrats and to anything like that. I don't have a political agenda at all. All I am literally doing is giving them exposure to the history they did not learn in high school because conservative politicians, in whatever ways they were effective at standardizing education, were successful at whitewashing standard education. It means whitewashing here doesn't mean deleting things that I'm now making up. It means overemphasizing or even creating factually incorrect information from nothing and then emphasizing that as if it is the norm. In essence, what this does then is it centers whiteness as a norm. It centers whiteness as the position of credibility. And then you look at African American studies as it's just an elective. And then what you will see if you join this class, if you join this Patreon, is it's not really African American history. It literally is just it's the American history and how it kind of affected Black people, but really just affected everybody. It's just the history you didn't learn, and it happens to be packaged in African American studies. That's it. Okay. Could you recommend a book for someone getting into this? There are lots of books. You see how many books? You can't even see the other rows of books I have above this one in the screen. You would have to hone in on a question like that because there's no way I could answer that. Yeah, we'll leave the door open, but please, I don't want to say I'm shutting the door, but please join my Patreon. Please support me. I promise you will have access to all of this information. You will be able to engage with me just like my students do. And we can talk about this. And if you want to learn about this, I think it's really important. You can see samples of it in my reels. This is the class. So if you're really like, oh my God, I need to take this class, I need to join, it's here. Here it is. You asked for it. Last question, and then seriously, last question, and then we're done. What are some good examples of countries that learned and moved on appropriately from ethnocentric socio norms? I don't think there is one. I think there are some examples of the ways that countries have moved on. Are they the right ones? Are they the ones we should model ourselves after? That is an entire debate where there could, in fact, be valid opinions on all sides of the spectrum. There's not really a correct answer there. Do I have certain countries that I look to as examples? Absolutely. Um, I think Scandinavian countries, and I think because I lived in Japan, and I speak Japanese. I have a host family. I was a foreign exchange student in Japan in high school at one particular point in time. I still keep in contact with my host family. Japan is a kind of subjective personal experience for what improving a country from its history could look like, but I do not believe that any country is perfect. I don't think Japan is perfect. I don't think Scandinavian countries are perfect. I think every country has its share of problems, but kind of like European academia did during the Renaissance era is borrow the best pieces of everyone's contribution in order to create a more perfect product that we could grow from. America needs to get its head out of its own ass and truly understand that it's okay to look at what other countries have done in a way and move politically in a direction that truly favors a more fair, just, and equal society for everyone, including immigrants. Okay, that's where I'm at. We'll leave it there. If you would like to ask me more questions, if you want to know the next thing that I'm building upon next week when we do this again, join the Patreon. The link is in my bio. I am Dr. Julius Doyle, and like I said, I want to talk with people. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your voices. I want to hear your perspectives, and I encourage intellectual honesty, which means I am not correct about everything. I do not know everything. But yes, with my subject matter expertise, I am fairly confident in what I do know. Okay. And so I would like to share that with you. And it is up to you as individuals to intellectually reconcile that in the ways that you see fit. And so that's where I'm at. Thank you so much for joining this freebie. I really appreciate your support, and I really hope to grow my Patreon. I really want to see more people join and support me, and I would love to engage with you on these topics. Ta-ta for now. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you next week, hopefully. Take care.